What if I told you that a royal secret passed down from the Queen Mother herself just shattered one of the most powerful traditions in British history? That a single velvet box, containing jewels older than the Second World War, just determined who the true heir of grace and loyalty really is? And that the name inside wasn't Meghan Markle's? For years, the royal family has been a stage, an elaborate performance of smiles, crowns, and carefully chosen words. But behind those palace gates, the whispers tell a very different story. A story of betrayal, loyalty, and a legacy that refuses to be rewritten by outsiders. And this time, it's not about titles, it's not about crowns. It's about something far more personal. A collection of jewels, hidden away by the Queen Mother herself, that were never meant for the public eye. Jewels that, according to insiders, have just been handed to Princess Catherine, bypassing Meghan Markle completely. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why? That's the question echoing through royal circles right now. Why Catherine? Why now? And why, after years of trying to present unity, would the royal bloodline make such a bold and deliberate statement that leaves Meghan completely out in the cold? Because this isn't just a gift. It's a message. The kind of message that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. The kind that's passed hand to hand, through family lines, through generations of silent queens and matriarchs who understand that power, in its truest form, doesn't roar, it whispers. And that whisper has now become a thunderclap, shaking the fragile illusion of royal unity. But before we get to that secret handover between Princess Alexandra and Catherine, we have to understand why it matters. Why these jewels aren't just glittering stones in royal boxes, but symbols of trust, morality, and the line between belonging and betrayal. The Queen Mother was not just a figurehead. She was a strategist. Behind her warm smile and pearls was a woman who outmaneuvered politicians, soothed kings, and steadied a country through war. Her jewelry collection wasn't just decorative, it was political armor. Every brooch, every necklace had a meaning. Some were worn to honor allies, others to signal warning, and a few, like the collection in question, were kept far from public sight, meant only for the Queen of Hearts, as the Queen Mother once called her successor in private letters. That phrase, Queen of Hearts, was not about lineage. It was about loyalty. And now, nearly 3 decades after the Queen Mother's passing, that symbolic title seems to have found its living embodiment in Catherine. Still, it's no coincidence that this handover happened quietly, without palace fanfare, without photographers, and without mention on official royal channels. Because this wasn't the kind of ceremony that needed the press. This was family business, royal blood business. Princess Alexandra, the Queen Mother's niece and one of the last living links to that wartime generation, reportedly summoned Catherine for a private meeting. No aides, no stylists, no official documents, just a velvet case, worn from age and wrapped in faded purple silk. Inside, sources claim, were jewels the Queen Mother personally set aside for a future queen she could trust completely. And Catherine was chosen. Now imagine the message that sends to Meghan Markle, who once believed she too would inherit part of that private collection as the wife of a royal son. Imagine the silence in Montecito when word reached her that her name was not even considered. The very same Meghan who once spoke of modernizing the monarchy was just erased from one of its most sacred traditions. But here's where things get even more interesting. Because this wasn't just about excluding Meghan. This was about reaffirming who the royal family sees as the rightful torchbearer of legacy and loyalty. Princess Alexandra, by passing the Queen Mother's jewels to Catherine, has effectively drawn a line through royal history. On one side stands duty, restraint, and continuity. On the other, rebellion, scandal, and self-interest. You can almost feel the tension simmering beneath the surface of every royal engagement. Catherine's calm smiles and public appearances suddenly seem more layered. Meghan's visible frustration during past events, her subtle gestures, her remarks about being silenced, now take on a different meaning when you realize the royal family was silently keeping her at arm's length the entire time. The jewels aren't just heirlooms. They're proof of who the Queen Mother believed would carry the crown's heart forward. Let's step back for a moment. The Queen Mother, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, was known to have kept a private list of possessions not included in the official royal collection. These were her personal treasures, pieces of deep sentimental and historic value, some dating back to Queen Mary and even earlier monarchs. She was meticulous about who should receive what, often jotting private notes about certain pieces. One note, allegedly recovered from her personal archives, reads, "To the one who serves with patience, not pride." Decades later, those words have become a prophecy fulfilled. When you think about it, Catherine has done everything by the book. She waited nearly a decade before marrying Prince William. She endured scrutiny, gossip, and endless comparisons without public complaint. She showed patience, grace, and dignity even as tabloids tore her apart. It's as though she was being tested, prepared, for the very moment when she would be deemed worthy of the Queen Mother's secret trust. Now, contrast that with Meghan Markle's meteoric rise and fall in royal ranks. From the fairy tale wedding to the explosive Oprah interview, Meghan's royal journey was fast, fiery, and polarizing. Her relationship with the palace fractured almost immediately, and while she spoke often about independence and modern change, it's that very attitude that may have cost her this inheritance. Because in the monarchy, independence isn't seen as strength, it's seen as defiance. And defiance, in royal tradition, is remembered far longer than loyalty. So when Princess Alexandra made her decision, it wasn't about favoritism. It was about preserving the unbroken chain of royal continuity that the Queen Mother valued above all else. Alexandra's choice to give Catherine the jewels wasn't just personal, it was political. It was the monarchy's way of saying, "This is the woman who understands what being royal truly means." But let's not underestimate how controversial that move was behind the scenes. Reports suggest that several members of the extended royal family were divided about the handover. Some viewed it as outdated favoritism, a snub that reignites old wounds. Others quietly applauded it, calling it a restoration of the Queen Mother's true legacy. Even within palace walls, loyalty has a price. There's an emotional irony in how history seems to be repeating itself. The Queen Mother herself was once an outsider before she became the backbone of the monarchy. But she earned her place through silence, service, and loyalty during the darkest years of the Second World War. Meghan Markle, by contrast, entered with cameras, celebrity, and confidence. But the moment conflict arose, she turned to media rather than the family. And that's where the Queen Mother's code would have drawn the line. So when Alexandra placed that velvet box in Catherine's hands, it wasn't just a transaction. It was the closing of a circle. The Queen Mother's legacy found its heir, and her unspoken warning found its proof that not all who marry into royalty are meant to inherit it. But what exactly was in that box? According to whispers from royal insiders, the collection included several significant pieces. A triple-strand pearl necklace reportedly worn by the Queen Mother during wartime speeches. A sapphire brooch belonging to Queen Mary. A diamond and emerald bracelet thought to have been a gift from King George VI himself. But the most talked-about piece, the one with the most symbolic weight, was an emerald tiara that hadn't been seen in public since the 1950s. That tiara, often referred to as the Crown of Hearts, was said to represent the spirit of the monarchy itself, compassion, dignity, and inner strength. It's no coincidence that Princess Alexandra chose to hand it to Catherine, a woman often described as having the calmness of a queen, even before the crown. Yet, this decision didn't go unnoticed outside the palace. Within hours, whispers began to circulate among royal watchers, journalists, and former aides. Some described it as the final blow to Meghan's hopes of reconciliation with the royal family. Others called it a deliberate act of erasure, an intentional reminder that no amount of fame or press could buy back royal trust once it's broken. And here's where it gets darker. There are reports suggesting that Meghan attempted, through intermediaries, to confirm whether her name had been removed from any informal lists of heirs to private items belonging to senior royals. If true, that's not just curiosity, it's desperation. Because within royal culture, being left out of private inheritances isn't just a snub, it's a declaration. It says, you are no longer part of us. And make no mistake, royal families communicate power not through words, but through gestures. A hand on a shoulder, a seat placement at a dinner, a missing invitation, or In this case, a velvet box changing hands under the radar while the excluded party is left thousands of miles away, watching the world interpret the silence. What's most chilling is how this story reflects the monarchy's age-old method of dealing with dissent. They don't argue, they erase. By handing Catherine those jewels, the royal family didn't just honor her. They made a statement to the world. The line of trust ends here. The inheritance of grace continues, but not through everyone who carries a royal title. And if the Queen Mother could speak from the past, one can only imagine the satisfaction and sorrow she might feel watching her secret plan unfold decades later. But there's still something missing. Because insiders hint that along with the jewels came a sealed envelope, a note written by the Queen Mother herself and entrusted to Princess Alexandra before her death. That note, according to speculation, carried instructions that would redefine who truly belongs to the House of Windsor. A message from beyond the grave. And it's that letter that could explain why Princess Alexandra acted now, after years of silence. Why she chose this exact moment to transfer the collection. Why, as the monarchy tries to rebuild after public division, this gesture suddenly emerged like a reminder from history. That loyalty isn't a title, it's a test. But what did that letter actually say? And why are royal insiders calling it the Queen Mother's final warning? Because what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. They say every royal secret begins with a locked door and a piece of paper no one was meant to see. But in this case, it began with a list, written in the Queen Mother's elegant cursive, faded over time, and sealed in a file that was never supposed to leave Clarence's house. The document was known only to a handful of trusted aides. It wasn't an official record of the crown jewels or an entry in the royal collection. No, this list was personal. It cataloged pieces the Queen Mother had privately inherited, collected, or commissioned during her lifetime. Treasures she called her heart's inheritance. And tucked between the lines, in her unmistakable handwriting, were names. Not the names of monarchs or heirs to the throne, but of women. Women she had trusted, observed, and believed would one day shape the monarchy's heart long after her own time had passed. But one name, according to those who have seen it, had been crossed out in red ink. It wasn't Catherine's. It wasn't even Diana's. It was Meghan Markle's. The discovery of this list has reignited old suspicions that the royal family has been quietly dividing its loyalties for years. Behind the polished appearances and press statements of unity lies a far older system of judgment, one that decides who deserves the monarchy's emotional inheritance and who does not. So how did this list come to light? To understand that, we need to go back to 2002, the year the Queen Mother passed away. Her funeral was a public affair of grandeur and grief, but behind the solemnity, her personal effects were carefully divided. Her will, like many royal wills, was sealed by the High Court and remains confidential. Only a few items, such as her paintings and official jewels, were documented publicly. But her private jewels, pieces not technically part of the monarchy's state collection, were another story. These jewels had stories of their own. Some were gifts. Some came from family friends and European aristocrats. A few were heirlooms of sentimental value, handed down from the Scottish branch of her family, the Bowes-Lyons. But unlike the official collection, these were not meant to be locked in glass cases or handed to whoever happened to marry into the family. They were meant to test character. Royal aides say that before her death, the Queen Mother spent years quietly observing the women around her, those who married into the royal family, those who aspired to, and those who might one day carry her spirit forward. She believed the monarchy would one day be tested not by politics or war, but by morality and loyalty. And so she made her list, a living document of trust. Decades later, when Princess Alexandra, her beloved niece, became the de facto custodian of that private list, she inherited more than jewelry. She inherited a responsibility to ensure the Queen Mother's legacy was passed only to those who lived by her values. But the world changed. The monarchy changed. And the arrival of Meghan Markle, an actress from California with global fame and a sharp sense of independence, complicated everything. At first, many believed Meghan would modernize the monarchy. She was glamorous, articulate, and confident. But what the public saw as progress, the old guard saw as peril. Because in the Queen Mother's time, individuality was dangerous, it threatened unity. So when Meghan began to clash with palace staff, question protocol, and eventually step away from royal duties altogether, whispers began to circulate. Princess Alexandra, who rarely speaks publicly, reportedly told a confidant that she understood the Queen Mother's fears all too well. That fear, that the wrong person might inherit not the jewels, but the symbolism they carried. Because make no mistake, these weren't just diamonds and emeralds. They were markers of trust. The Queen Mother believed jewelry had meaning beyond wealth. She wore certain brooches to signal strength, others to send coded messages of solidarity. A pearl strand meant peace. A sapphire brooch meant vigilance. To her, the true royal legacy wasn't gold, it was grace. So imagine the magnitude of that list. Names of women she deemed worthy of carrying that legacy forward. Princess Margaret, Princess Alexandra, Princess Anne, and, in a final handwritten note added long after the list began, Catherine. Catherine's name wasn't there during the Queen Mother's lifetime. She was still a schoolgirl when the matriarch died. But the Queen Mother's words left space for what she called a future queen of quiet strength. When Princess Alexandra reviewed the Queen Mother's archives years later, she reportedly saw Catherine's public composure, her charity work, and her unwavering support of Prince William, and knew instantly who fit that description. But Meghan's arrival complicated that prophecy. Royal watchers often forget that Meghan was, for a brief moment, the more famous and globally recognized royal bride. When she married Prince Harry, she brought an energy the palace hadn't seen since Diana, a confidence that drew media and controversy in equal measure. Some insiders whispered that Meghan believed she could charm her way into the Queen Mother's favor posthumously, through modernization and visibility. But the monarchy doesn't reward visibility, it rewards discretion. And that's why Meghan's name appeared briefly on the modernized inheritance draft before being crossed out in red ink, reportedly by Princess Alexandra herself, following Meghan's departure from royal duties in 2020. The symbolism of that act cannot be overstated. Red ink, in royal documentation, often signifies rejection or cancellation. It's final. It's deliberate. To be crossed out on the Queen Mother's heirloom list wasn't merely to be excluded. It was to be declared unworthy of the crown's emotional inheritance. Now, let's imagine the scene. Clarence House, a quiet, book-filled study with polished oak furniture. Princess Alexandra, aged but sharp, seated beneath the portrait of the Queen Mother. Before her, a stack of yellowed papers, ribbon-tied and marked with wax. A small light catching the edges of the ink as she traces her finger over each name. And then she stops. Meghan Markle. The ink around her name has already faded. The handwriting of a generation gone. Alexandra picks up her fountain pen, hesitates, and draws a single, clean line through it. Done. It's almost poetic in its simplicity. And just like that, the fate of Meghan's place in royal history was sealed not with a speech, not with an announcement, but with a stroke of a pen on a document only 3 people would ever see. But that stroke, quiet, deliberate, and devastating, would one day resurface as the catalyst for one of the most talked-about royal moments of the decade, the secret transfer of the Queen Mother's jewels to Catherine. Because every story needs proof. And this list, this secret heirloom list, was that proof. Proof that Catherine wasn't merely chosen for convenience or favoritism. She was chosen because she had passed the test of silence. When the Queen Mother once said, "A queen's greatest strength is her restraint," it wasn't meant as poetry. It was instruction. And in the decades since her passing, that single value, restraint, has become Catherine's signature. It's why she never reacted publicly to Meghan's claims. Why she continued to smile at public events despite the chaos unfolding in the press. Why she was seen as the steady hand the monarchy needed during the storm. And it's why, when the time came for Princess Alexandra to act on the Queen Mother's list, there was no hesitation. But here's where the story takes an even darker twist. After Meghan's name was crossed out, sources say another handwritten note was added beneath Catherine's. Inheritance secured. Future Queen of Hearts confirmed. Those 5 words, Queen of Hearts confirmed, are now being whispered throughout royal circles as the Queen Mother's unofficial final blessing. But that note was never meant for public eyes. It was sealed again and locked away, along with the jewels, in a private family vault within Marlborough House, until recently. And this is where things start to unravel. Because just months ago, a royal historian, while cataloging estate records for an upcoming royal exhibit, reportedly stumbled upon references to an unlisted collection transfer, overseen personally by Princess Alexandra. It matched the timing of Catherine's private visit to Marlborough House, just days before she was photographed wearing a sapphire brooch identical to one last seen on the Queen Mother in 1949. Coincidence? Or confirmation? The media might have dismissed it as Catherine borrowing from the official royal vault, but those who know the Queen Mother's handwriting say otherwise. Because that same historian claims to have seen a faded inventory note referencing brooch number 11, passed away, Alexandra, for safekeeping until rightful heir manifests by patience. And that's when everything started to connect. The rightful heir had manifested. Her name was Catherine. But there's another layer to this saga that few people realize. The secrecy wasn't just about Catherine receiving the jewels. It was about preventing Meghan from ever challenging that transfer. Because while public royal collections are governed by law, private inheritances, like the Queen Mother's jewels, fall under entirely different jurisdiction. They are personal property, not state assets, meaning no public record, no legal claim, no headlines, just silence. And that silence is precisely how the monarchy protects itself. They don't announce betrayals. They erase them from the record. It's almost chilling when you think about it. The Queen Mother's code of loyalty carried out decades after her death. Princess Alexandra fulfilling a promise that transcends time. Catherine stepping into a role preordained by conduct, not by birth. And Meghan, left to watch the narrative unfold, powerless to change it. But the real question that lingers is this: how many more lists like this exist? Because if the Queen Mother created one, what about the late Queen Elizabeth II? What about Princess Margaret's private will, sealed indefinitely by the court? How many silent judgments have been passed down, written in looping cursive, buried in drawers and vaults, shaping the monarchy's unseen power structure? It makes you wonder how much of royal history has been rewritten not by speeches, but by small gestures, like a handover between two women behind closed doors. And as for that list, its existence is now royal legend. No photographs, no confirmation, only whispers. But whispers, in the world of royalty, are far more powerful than proof. Because whispers allow mystery to breathe, and the monarchy thrives on mystery. But what happens when the mystery becomes too visible? When the public starts asking questions? That's exactly what's happening now. Rumors of this heirloom list are spreading faster than the palace can manage. Every historian, journalist, and royal watcher wants to know, was Meghan really crossed out? Did Princess Alexandra truly act on the Queen Mother's last instructions? And if so, what else did she find in those files? Because one name being erased may just be the beginning. And if this list reveals anything else, any hidden names, secret deals, or lost heirlooms, it could unravel decades of royal silence. But what came next would make this secret list look like child's play. Because in a quiet ceremony at Marlborough House, with no cameras and no press, Princess Alexandra took the next step in the Queen Mother's prophecy. She didn't just protect the legacy. She passed it on. And the woman who received it, Catherine, had no idea that one of the most controversial royal acts in decades was about to begin. But what she found waiting for her inside that velvet box would leave her speechless and Meghan furious. Because in that moment, history repeated itself, and no one saw it coming. They say true loyalty is measured not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments no one sees. And if there's one thing Catherine, Princess of Wales, has mastered, it is that invisible, nearly imperceptible loyalty. But did the world truly understand what she endured behind closed doors? Did Meghan Markle, with all her global fame and charisma, even grasp what it meant to live under the relentless gaze of the monarchy while maintaining composure, grace, and patience? Because patience, in the royal family, is far more valuable than gold. Catherine's path to becoming the Queen Mother's chosen heir for the private jewels was not paved with headlines or press releases. It was defined by years of observation, testing, and, some might say, trial by fire. From the very beginning of her relationship with Prince William, Catherine was watched. Every smile, every gesture, every interaction with palace staff, the public, and even Meghan herself was quietly assessed. It wasn't just about manners. It wasn't even about public popularity. It was about character. about whether she could withstand scandal, gossip, and the unique pressures of marrying into a family that has lived under the world's microscope for centuries. And Catherine passed every test. Consider her early days as William's fiancée. The press was merciless, dissecting every outfit, every smile, every move. Rumors swirled about her alleged ambitions. She was described as shy, poised, and sometimes distant. But every public event was a display of restraint. She laughed when appropriate. She offered warmth to the public. She never retaliated against false stories. She endured, and in enduring, she quietly proved her worth. Meanwhile, Meghan's approach could not have been more different. She arrived with confidence and a global media presence that demanded attention. Her every gesture was magnified, analyzed, and criticized. But unlike Catherine, Meghan often used the press to make her point. She spoke, publicly, about grievances, expectations, and perceived slights. In doing so, she exposed herself to scrutiny, to judgment, and to consequences that would ripple through the royal family for years. Catherine, on the other hand, became almost invisible in the palace hierarchy, not in importance, but in her ability to act without fanfare. That invisibility, some insiders say, is exactly what allowed her to pass the Queen Mother's silent test. Because history has proven that the monarchy does not reward those who shout their loyalty. It rewards those who demonstrate it, quietly, consistently, and without expectation of recognition. The test wasn't a single moment. It was years of small, cumulative actions that painted a portrait of a royal spouse who could be trusted with the family's most sacred legacies. Take, for example, the early tours Catherine undertook with William. Long hours, formal events, charitable engagements. Her stamina was unmatched. But more importantly, she never sought the spotlight. She didn't court headlines. She didn't attempt to modernize the monarchy on her own terms. She respected tradition while subtly showing her own intelligence and compassion. It's in these nuances that Princess Alexandra reportedly saw the future Queen of Hearts. The woman who could balance public duty with private restraint. The woman whose loyalty was proven not through media narratives, but through consistent, silent endurance. And then there were the personal moments, private gestures caught on camera only by the most observant royal watchers. Catherine was often photographed adjusting a crown, offering comfort to William during tense moments, or discreetly supporting staff who had been criticized. Each of these minor actions, insignificant to the casual observer, was a signal to insiders that Catherine understood the real meaning of royalty, service, not fame. Contrast that with Meghan's public confrontations. Whether it was disputes over protocol, public statements, or high-profile interviews, her actions often highlighted personal ambition over institutional loyalty. From the palace's perspective, this behavior was more than just unconventional, it was dangerous. The Queen Mother's philosophy was simple. The monarchy survives on discretion, not declarations. Which brings us to a critical moment. One that many believe solidified Catherine's position as the rightful heir to the Queen Mother's private jewels. It occurred during an unpublicized event in Scotland, where the royal family gathered privately to honor a long-serving aide who had been with the monarchy for decades. Catherine, by all accounts, displayed a calmness and attentiveness that left both staff and senior royals impressed. She spoke little, listened carefully, and offered gestures of gratitude that were both understated and sincere. Meanwhile, Meghan was absent, preoccupied with media commitments and her own engagements abroad. To some insiders, this absence was more than logistical, it was symbolic. Meghan's priorities appeared to diverge from the traditional expectations of the royal family, and in doing so, she highlighted the contrast between herself and Catherine. The Queen Mother's private list, when reviewed years later, is said to have reflected exactly this judgment. Those who demonstrate loyalty through action, not words, are marked for inclusion. Those who prioritize personal visibility, even if justified by career or social prominence, are quietly removed. Catherine's test continued through the early years of her marriage. The intense scrutiny, relentless tabloid narratives, and constant comparisons to Princess Diana could have been overwhelming. But she persisted, maintaining composure while subtly influencing the public narrative through kindness, poise, and strategic participation in charitable work. She understood, intuitively, that power in the monarchy is not taken, it is observed. It is earned in private moments that few will ever see. And Princess Alexandra, the custodian of the Queen Mother's legacy, noticed everything. Insiders recall a moment when Catherine quietly intervened to help palace staff navigate an internal dispute. Her intervention was subtle, unseen by the press, but it left a lasting impression on senior aides. It was exactly the type of behavior the Queen Mother had valued during her lifetime. Small, discreet acts that demonstrated integrity, humility, and loyalty. It's no coincidence that Catherine's name eventually appeared on the Queen Mother's heirloom list. She hadn't campaigned for it, posted about it, or demanded recognition. She had simply lived in a way that reflected the values the Queen Mother had championed for decades. And then, of course, there was Meghan. Even before the Sussexes' departure from royal duties, there were murmurs within palace corridors that Meghan's behavior was troubling. Meetings she missed, protocols she questioned, and public interviews she gave. All of these contributed to an image of unreliability in the eyes of the senior royals. And while Meghan's public narrative focused on modernization and inclusion, the internal narrative painted a different picture, one of disloyalty. The contrast could not have been starker. Catherine's silence spoke volumes. Meghan's voice, while amplified, revealed cracks in the foundation of her royal commitment. By the time Princess Alexandra made her decision to hand Catherine the Queen Mother's private jewels, Catherine had already completed what insiders call the silent test of loyalty. She had proven her discretion, her patience, and her dedication to the monarchy without expectation of reward. In many ways, this test was far more demanding than any public role or ceremonial duty. It required living under constant observation, navigating global scrutiny, and maintaining composure through challenges that would have undone most people. And yet Catherine excelled. The Queen Mother's jewels, therefore, were more than a collection. They were a symbol of the monarchy's ultimate trust. By passing them to Catherine, Princess Alexandra was confirming that the silent endurance of decades had been observed, recognized, and rewarded. But Meghan, whose name had been quietly crossed off the heirloom list, would soon discover that loyalty isn't just a virtue, it's currency. And in the royal world, currency determines access to history, legacy, and sometimes even morality itself. As Catherine prepared to receive the jewels, a storm was brewing far away in California. Meghan and Harry's camp, unaware of the secret list, had only just begun to realize the magnitude of what they were missing. For them, the jewels weren't merely stones, they were proof of belonging. And being excluded was, in their eyes, a personal and public humiliation. Yet Catherine, in her characteristic calm, could only prepare herself to accept the legacy quietly. Because to her, the jewels were never about ego or recognition. They were about responsibility. And in this moment, responsibility carried a weight far greater than any press headline could measure. And as Princess Alexandra approached Catherine with the velvet case in her hands, the historical significance of the moment settled over the room. The Queen Mother's judgment, made decades earlier, was finally being enacted. But what happened next? The moment Catherine opened the box and saw the contents would reveal not only the jewels themselves, but the message behind them. A message so powerful, so deliberate, that it would leave Meghan Markle's allies scrambling for answers. Because the silent test of loyalty had ended, and the results were in. What if I told you that long before Meghan Markle ever stepped foot into the palace, a promise was made that would ripple through decades of royal history, quietly shaping the fate of future queens? A promise so personal, so carefully safeguarded, that only a few insiders even knew it existed. And now, it has become the key to understanding why Catherine, not Meghan, was chosen to inherit the Queen Mother's private jewels. The story begins in the waning years of the Queen Mother's life. By 2000, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon had witnessed almost a century of monarchy's triumphs and scandals. She had navigated wars, political upheaval, and the tragic loss of her daughter-in-law, Princess Diana. In those moments of reflection, she thought deeply not about titles or ceremonies, but about legacy, the women who would carry the monarchy's heart forward. It was during one of these private reflections that the Queen Mother made what insiders now refer to as the forgotten promise. According to palace aides who later recounted the details, she called Princess Alexandra her niece and confidant, into a quiet sitting room lined with portraits of long-dead royals. There, she handed Alexandra a small, velvet-lined box containing 3 of her most cherished jewels. But the true gift wasn't the jewels themselves. It was a promise. "Whoever inherits these," the Queen Mother reportedly said, her voice soft but unwavering, "must carry them not for power, but for grace. They are a test, a reminder that being royal is not about fame, nor about ambition, but about loyalty, patience, and quiet strength." The significance of this promise can't be overstated. To the Queen Mother, jewels were never just decorative items. They were symbols, each piece carrying meaning beyond its material value. A pearl strand could represent endurance, a sapphire brooch might signal vigilance, a diamond necklace might symbolize unwavering commitment. And the promise ensured that the right woman, the one who truly embodied these virtues, would receive them. But what made this promise even more remarkable was its deliberate secrecy. The Queen Mother knew that any public acknowledgement could politicize the gift and undermine its meaning. So she entrusted Princess Alexandra with a dual responsibility: safeguard the jewels and determine, quietly and with discretion, who would inherit them. For decades, Alexandra followed this instruction meticulously. She catalogued every piece, noted its history, and recorded subtle observations about the women who entered the royal family. Some she watched for years, noting patience, humility, and composure under pressure. Others she dismissed as ambitious or impulsive, seeing in them behaviors that might tarnish the legacy the Queen Mother hoped to preserve. And then, Catherine appeared. From her early days with Prince William, Catherine demonstrated qualities that would eventually fulfill the Queen Mother's promise. She endured scrutiny from the media without complaint. She quietly supported charitable causes, showing compassion and a commitment to public service. She respected the traditions of the monarchy, even when public opinion suggested modernization. And she displayed a rare form of patience, the kind that comes not from weakness, but from inner strength. Every move Catherine made, no matter how small, was a step in the silent test the Queen Mother had envisioned. She did not seek approval, she did not seek fame. She simply lived in accordance with values the monarchy has revered for centuries. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's arrival created tension. Her confidence, charisma, and global profile were undeniable, but insiders argue that her approach conflicted with the traditions the Queen Mother valued most. Whereas Catherine quietly earned respect through consistent behavior, Meghan often relied on media exposure and public narratives to assert her position. The contrast, in the eyes of Alexandra, could not have been starker. The forgotten promise, therefore, was not only about Catherine, it was also about Meghan. The Queen Mother's words, whispered to Alexandra years before, established criteria that would eventually determine who could inherit not just jewels, but legacy. And Alexandra, honoring that promise, began preparing for the eventual handover. She reviewed archival notes, studied photographs, and even consulted private diaries that recorded the Queen Mother's reflections on family and character. Each observation reaffirmed what she had already suspected. Catherine embodied the very qualities the Queen Mother valued most. And Meghan, despite her achievements, had not yet, or perhaps could not, demonstrate those same qualities. The story takes an emotional turn when we consider Catherine's own awareness of the promise. While she may not have known every detail, palace insiders say she understood, intuitively, that certain actions mattered more than public recognition. Her decision to support staff, to participate in charity work with sincerity, and to maintain composure under intense media scrutiny were not performed for headlines. They were performed because she recognized a deeper responsibility. This alignment of character and intent made her the perfect recipient of the Queen Mother's private inheritance. Alexandra, recognizing this, orchestrated the transfer with meticulous care, not for publicity, not for fame, but to honor the promise made decades earlier. And here's where the tension escalates. Because while Catherine's path followed the Queen Mother's vision, Meghan's journey diverged sharply. Meghan believed in visibility, advocacy, and global influence. But these virtues, while admirable in other contexts, conflicted with the traditional criteria of loyalty and discretion that governed the inheritance. By the time the handover occurred, Meghan had already inadvertently disqualified herself, not through malice, but through choices that highlighted the divide between modern celebrity culture and centuries-old royal expectation. To understand the depth of the Queen Mother's promise, consider the emotional weight it carried. Alexandra reportedly described the moment she finally made the decision as a fulfillment of trust, a closure of decades-long observation, and an acknowledgement of grace that transcends time. For Catherine, receiving the jewels was not just a ceremonial honor. It was a confirmation that her silent loyalty, patience, and character had been noticed, and that the Queen Mother's vision for the monarchy would continue. Yet, the emotional complexity doesn't end there. The Queen Mother's promise also served as a subtle warning. By entrusting Alexandra with the responsibility of passing on the jewels, she set into motion a mechanism to protect the monarchy's moral compass. Those who failed to demonstrate loyalty and restraint would be quietly excluded. No confrontation, no scandal, just omission. And for Meghan, that omission would be profoundly felt. As we move toward the private handover of the jewels, it's important to recognize the psychological nuance at play. Catherine's endurance, her composure, and her discretion weren't simply personal virtues. They were tests administered by history itself, under the watchful eye of Alexandra. Each gesture of patience, each unpublicized act of kindness, was a point scored in a silent evaluation that would ultimately decide who carried the Queen Mother's legacy forward. This brings us to the pivotal moment, the handover itself. Alexandra, honoring the promise, carefully arranged the transfer. Not in public, not with cameras, but in a private setting, where the emotional and symbolic weight of the act could be fully appreciated. The velvet-lined box, containing jewels of immense historic and sentimental value, was presented to Catherine in a way that ensured the Queen Mother's vision was fully realized. And yet, the significance of this act cannot be fully appreciated without understanding the magnitude of the promise itself. This was not a simple gift. It was a moral judgment, a declaration of trust, and a message that would echo through the halls of the monarchy for years to come. By accepting the jewels, Catherine was not merely inheriting material wealth. She was inheriting the Queen Mother's faith in her character and the implicit responsibility to uphold a standard of loyalty and grace that defined a dynasty. But what did this promise mean for Meghan? In a world where inheritance and recognition are inextricably linked, being left out was more than symbolic. It was a statement, a declaration that loyalty, restraint, and discretion were the true currencies of royal life, and that they could not be substituted by fame, ambition, or media influence. As Catherine's hands closed over the velvet box, the weight of centuries seemed to settle on her shoulders. The Queen Mother's promise, once forgotten, had finally been fulfilled. The lineage of grace continued, and the silent judgment of a matriarch long gone had found its living embodiment. But the story does not end here. For while Catherine accepted the jewels, Meghan and her allies were just beginning to understand the full implications of being excluded. The promise had been fulfilled. The jewels had been passed on. And yet, the consequences of this decision were only beginning to ripple outward, threatening to challenge perceptions, stir emotions, and reignite debates about loyalty, legacy, and entitlement within one of the most scrutinized families in history. Because in the world of royalty, promises, even those made in private, carry power far beyond what any headline can capture. And in this case, the Queen Mother's promise had just reshaped the future of the monarchy in ways no one could have predicted. The question now looms: what comes next for those who were excluded? And how will the ripple effects of this silent judgment be felt in the years to come? Because the Queen Mother's promise, once forgotten, has finally spoken, and its consequences are far from over. Imagine believing that you are destined to inherit a legacy, only to realize someone else has quietly taken your place. That was the reality for Meghan Markle in the months leading up to the private handover of the Queen Mother's jewels. According to insiders, Meghan was convinced she had a rightful claim, not just by marriage, but by virtue of her ambition and public prominence. But the royal world has a way of humbling even the most confident newcomers, and in this case, the humbling began with a private plea, a desperate attempt to reclaim what she believed was hers. It started quietly. Meghan, aware that Princess Alexandra was the custodian of the Queen Mother's private collection, reportedly instructed an intermediary to deliver a message, not through media channels, not in public statements, but in a discreet, carefully worded letter. The letter, according to those close to the palace, was both emotional and assertive. Meghan reportedly emphasized her role as the wife of a royal son, her contributions to the monarchy, and the sacrifices she claimed to have made for the family. She framed the plea as a matter of justice, appealing to Alexandra's sense of fairness and discretion. But the underlying tone was unmistakable. She expected recognition, and she expected inclusion. It's easy to see why Meghan thought she had a chance. After all, she had captivated the world with her charisma, her style, and her message of modernity. She had transformed the public's perception of what a duchess could be. She had shown herself to be both socially conscious and media-savvy. And perhaps most importantly, she had married into a family whose history is steeped in traditions she publicly embraced, yet privately, she believed she could also modernize. But Princess Alexandra operates on a different set of rules. Her lens is not shaped by public acclaim or celebrity influence. It is defined by loyalty, discretion, and a long view of monarchy that spans generations. While Meghan's letter was heartfelt, and perhaps even persuasive in a conventional sense, it failed to meet the criteria that Alexandra valued most: patience, quiet endurance, and the subtle understanding that being royal is more about character than position. Royal insiders recall that Alexandra read Meghan's plea carefully, noting every word. She reportedly paused multiple times, reflecting on the contrast between Meghan's words and Catherine's conduct over the years. The verdict, according to sources, was quietly resolute. The jewels were not for Meghan. This decision was not arbitrary. It was deeply symbolic. It reinforced a central principle in the monarchy: emotional inheritance is earned, not demanded. The Queen Mother had spent decades observing behavior, testing character, and selecting heirs for her private treasures based on qualities that went far beyond titles or marital connections. And Alexandra, acting as her custodian, followed that principle with precision. But Meghan's reaction, insiders say, was immediate and intense. When news of Catherine's quiet receipt of the jewels reached her circle, shock turned to anger. Sources report that Meghan attempted further inquiries, calling on friends, lawyers, and aides to confirm whether her exclusion was deliberate. The answer, however, was unambiguous. The decision had been made. It's worth pausing to consider the psychological dynamics at play here. In the royal family, public perception matters, but private judgment matters more. Meghan, accustomed to the world of Hollywood and global media, approached the monarchy with assumptions that public recognition equates to influence. Alexandra and the custodians of royal legacy, however, operate under a different code. Influence is demonstrated quietly, often in ways invisible to the media, but visible to those who understand the weight of history. Catherine had lived under that code for years. Meghan had not. According to insiders, Meghan's plea included a specific request to review the Queen Mother's private list or inventory. She reportedly argued that transparency was owed to her as a member of the royal family. But Alexandra, following both the letter and the spirit of the Queen Mother's instructions, refused. The list, after all, was never meant for public eyes. It was intended to safeguard the integrity of the family's legacy, and Alexandra understood that revealing it, even partially, could compromise the very principles the Queen Mother had sought to preserve. At this point, tension within the royal family was reaching a boiling point, albeit quietly. Catherine, the intended recipient, remained unaware of the full extent of Meghan's private attempts. She knew only that she had been summoned by Alexandra to receive a collection of jewels of immense historical and symbolic value. What she did not know was that her acceptance would provoke one of the most dramatic moments of exclusion in modern royal history. The jewels themselves, as described by sources, were breathtaking. A sapphire brooch that had once belonged to Queen Mary, a diamond and emerald bracelet from King George VI, pearls that the Queen Mother had worn during her most significant public addresses, and the emerald tiara, known as the Crown of Hearts, which embodied the very essence of grace and patience. Catherine, following Alexandra's guidance, approached the handover with humility, understanding that the true significance of the jewels lay not in their monetary value, but in their moral weight. Each piece represented the Queen Mother's judgment, her wisdom, and her vision of what it meant to serve the monarchy faithfully. Meanwhile, Meghan's circle was reportedly seething. The private plea, meant to sway Alexandra, had failed. Reports suggest that Meghan's advisors began to explore alternative avenues, legal consultations, media leaks, and public statements designed to create pressure. Yet Alexandra remained unyielding. To her, the rules of loyalty were absolute. Actions, not words, determined inheritance. This moment illustrates a profound divide between two approaches to royalty. Catherine embodies endurance, quiet influence, and the kind of restraint that the Queen Mother revered. Meghan embodies visibility, vocal advocacy, and a belief that influence can be leveraged through media and public attention. Both approaches carry power, but only one aligns with the century-old principles that govern private royal inheritances. The private plea also sheds light on Meghan's understanding or misunderstanding of royal hierarchy. In Hollywood, persuasion is often public, performative, and dramatic. In the monarchy, persuasion is discreet, subtle, and enduring. Alexandra's response to Meghan's plea reflects this ethos. The jewels were not about generosity or favoritism. They were about trust, earned through consistent, quiet behavior over years. According to insiders, this exchange also highlighted a critical lesson for Meghan. The monarchy's values are not aligned with instant recognition. They reward patience, endurance, and fidelity to tradition. Meghan, despite her achievements and global prominence, had not demonstrated the qualities that would make her worthy of inheriting the Queen Mother's most personal treasures. Meanwhile, Catherine's silent test of loyalty had been fulfilled. By maintaining composure, observing tradition, and quietly supporting both the royal family and public causes, she demonstrated exactly what Alexandra, and by extension, the Queen Mother, had sought to preserve. The contrast between the two women could not have been starker. Catherine's legacy was quietly solidifying. Meghan's expectations were quietly crumbling. But the story doesn't end with the rejection. The private plea, while unsuccessful, set in motion a series of events that would make headlines, fuel tabloid speculation, and further polarize public opinion. Meghan's exclusion from the inheritance became a catalyst, sparking discussions about loyalty, entitlement, and the unspoken rules of the monarchy. It's important to understand that Alexandra's response was calculated. By honoring the Queen Mother's promise and rejecting Meghan's plea, she ensured that the legacy would remain intact. Catherine would receive the jewels as a symbol of moral inheritance, not as a prize to be demanded. Meghan's reaction, intense as it may have been, would not alter the decision. The private plea also revealed a deeper truth. In the monarchy, influence is not dictated by celebrity, media attention, or public acclaim. It is dictated by character, by patience, and by a willingness to serve without expectation. And for Meghan, the private plea was an unambiguous reminder that fame does not equate to trust, nor does ambition guarantee inclusion. By the time the handover took place, the stakes had never been higher. Catherine, quietly and without fanfare, accepted the jewels. Meghan, meanwhile, began to recognize the full implications of being left out. The private plea had failed, and the lesson was clear. The monarchy's moral compass was absolute. And yet, the consequences of this exchange extended beyond a single act of inheritance. It was a turning point, a moment that would define public perception, deepen divisions within the royal family, and set the stage for one of the most scrutinized episodes in modern royal history. Because what Meghan had hoped to gain through her private plea was more than a collection of jewels. It was legitimacy, inclusion, and a validation of her role within the family. And being denied all three was a lesson she, and the world, would not forget. But just as the jewels were handed to Catherine, a shadow lingered over the monarchy. Meghan's private plea, though rejected, had exposed vulnerabilities. The story of loyalty, discretion, and inheritance was far from complete. And what came next would push the limits of secrecy, test the patience of everyone involved, and reveal the true weight of the Queen Mother's forgotten promise. Because in the royal family, the silence following a decision is often louder than any announcement. And what came after Alexandra's quiet rejection of Meghan's plea would change everything. And no one anticipated the storm that was about to hit Montecito and beyond. secrets rarely stay buried in the royal family, especially when they involve jewels, whispers of betrayal, and the careful orchestration of decades-old promises. What started as a private plea from Meghan Markle to Princess Alexandra quickly escalated into something far larger, an investigative leak that sent shockwaves through royal circles and the global press. It began with a seemingly innocuous detail. A palace aide noticed discrepancies in the publicly documented royal collection. While the Queen Mother's official jewels had always been accounted for, whispers of an unlisted set of private treasures began circulating among senior staff. This was the collection that Princess Alexandra had meticulously safeguarded, waiting for the right heir. Catherine, of course, was poised to inherit it. But the secrecy surrounding the handover had begun to unravel. An anonymous insider, later identified by some journalists as a retired member of the household staff, hinted that several pieces had been quietly removed from the vault and prepared for transfer. While no names were disclosed at the time, this insider's leak was enough to ignite speculation. Who was receiving these treasures? And why had the news been withheld from the public? The investigative journalists pounced. Royal reporters began digging into ceremonial schedules, private visits, and public appearances of both Catherine and Meghan. Every detail was analyzed for clues. A sapphire brooch spotted on Catherine during a discreet charity event, once attributed to borrowing from the palace collection, now raised eyebrows. Could it be one of the Queen Mother's private jewels, quietly handed over to Catherine? Meghan's circle, already tense from the failed private plea, grew suspicious. Sources suggest that aides and lawyers began inquiring more aggressively, trying to confirm the transfer and identify the recipients. But Alexandra's operation was tight. The vault had limited access. Only a handful of trusted aides were aware of the handover, and the jewels themselves had been moved under strict supervision, ensuring there was no paper trail outside the palace. Yet the investigative leak persisted. The leak's impact was immediate. Tabloids ran stories speculating about a mysterious handover of jewels, implying that Meghan had been excluded without cause. Headlines questioned palace unity, loyalty, and fairness, framing Catherine's involvement as a secret favoritism and casting shadows over the Sussex's standing. While much of the coverage was speculative, the leak had already done its job. It placed pressure on the palace to control the narrative. Royal insiders emphasized that the leak was far more than gossip. It was strategic. Whoever provided the information understood the dynamics at play. Catherine's calm, measured approach contrasted sharply with Meghan's high-profile media persona. By making the handover public through rumor, the leaker ensured that the palace's internal decision would gain scrutiny without revealing confidential details. It was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The investigative leak also revealed just how much the monarchy relies on silence to maintain power. Public opinion can be swayed by media narratives, but private inheritances, like the Queen Mother's jewels, operate under a different system. Only those who truly understand the weight of history, the nuances of behavior, and the principles of loyalty are granted access. Everyone else is left guessing. It was in this environment of uncertainty that Catherine's position became even more significant. She remained composed despite media speculation and rumors. Unlike Meghan, who might have been provoked to respond, Catherine understood the subtle dynamics at play. Her silence was not indifference. It was strategy, patience, and a reflection of the very qualities that Alexandra and the Queen Mother valued most. Meanwhile, Meghan's team scrambled to get details. Emails, calls, and informal inquiries were made to palace staff, journalists, and even former aides. But the palace had anticipated this. The handover had been meticulously planned to ensure minimal exposure. Only Catherine and a few witnesses knew the full truth. Alexandra, operating in accordance with the Queen Mother's instructions, refused to provide confirmations, ensuring that the narrative remained partially hidden and partially speculative. The investigative leak, however, had unintended consequences. For one, it provided a rare glimpse into the mechanics of royal secrecy, allowing journalists and the public to piece together timelines, connections, and motives. Analysts began mapping visits, events, and even subtle wardrobe choices to trace the path of the jewels from Alexandra to Catherine. Every photograph, every public appearance was scrutinized for hints. For Meghan, The leak was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it confirmed that something significant was happening behind the scenes. On the other, it made her exclusion increasingly public, amplifying the perception that she had been deliberately bypassed. Public speculation began to frame her not merely as absent, but as actively shut out, a narrative that fueled global discussions about fairness, privilege, and entitlement. The leak also gave rise to conflicting narratives within the palace. Some aides argued that the exposure was harmful, undermining the intended discretion of the handover. Others believed it would reinforce the importance of loyalty and patience by highlighting the contrast between Catherine's quiet endurance and Meghan's public assertiveness. In effect, the leak served to underscore the very principles the Queen Mother had sought to preserve. In the weeks that followed, investigative journalists pieced together more evidence. Details emerged about Catherine's private visits to Marlborough House, the careful handling of the jewels, and the presence of Alexandra overseeing the process.